Hi and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, on today's webinar. Today, we are talking about applying to med school as a non-traditional applicant. So let's get started. Actually, let me introduce myself. I'm Bianca. I'm a team member here at Inspira Advantage. We are an academic consultation group committed to helping you guys get into the country's top medical schools. Now we get started. All right, we'll go through our agenda for today. First, I will introduce you to our wonderful panelists. Second, we'll talk about what exactly a non-traditional applicant is. Then we'll go ahead and get into how medical schools view non-traditional applicants, things to consider when you apply, and then tailoring your application to increase your chances of acceptance as a non-traditional medical school student. And then we will talk about some tips to make the most out of your application. And then we'll move on into the question and answer section of our webinar. So if you're looking at your screen, you'll see a Q&A there. If you have any questions, you can pop that in there and we will answer them all at the end. So let us introduce you to our panelists. Thank you guys so much for being here. We have Jen and Callie. You guys can go ahead and do a quick introduction. Whoever wants to go first.
First, I guess, just because my name's first on the screen. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen. I went to med school at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona and just started residency last summer in OBGYN at Duke University. I'm originally from Ohio, so know what it's like to travel kind of all over the country for med school and for residency. And I was also a non-traditional applicant. So I'm very excited for this webinar to talk to you all about your journeys and how you can find success in being different.
And hi there, I'm Callie. I'm originally from Iowa and I'm now a medical student at Yale and I'm applying into psychiatry for residency and have served on the admissions committee here. Yeah, that's me.
Beautiful. Thanks for the introductions. All right, let's get started. What is a non-traditional med school applicant? We'll get right into it. Jen, you can take the floor here.
So when we think of non-traditional applicants, we're really referring to people who are applying to med school later in their academic and in their personal lives. So a traditional applicant is somebody who we think of that goes right through school to school to school. So somebody who graduates high school and starts college, graduates college and starts med school, graduates med school and starts residency. That's kind of what was before considered the traditional path, the path that people were expected to do. And a non-traditional applicant was anybody who didn't quite follow that linear path. And some people taking detours at really any point in their careers or taking more time, maybe between schools. We usually think of non-traditional applicants as somebody who've had other careers, whether that's a career in medicine or out of medicine. And they tend to be older, obviously, because they've taken a little bit more time.
Thanks so much, Jen. All right. So now we'll talk about the difference between traditional and non-traditional applicants. I know, Jen, you've brushed on this a little bit, but we'll go a bit further. All right.
All right. So traditional applicants apply right after college or even during college, typically between 20 to 24 years old, usually have a background in science, although you don't necessarily have to, and decided on a medical career pretty early on, like especially if you're going to be applying straight through. That means that you really have to have decided in your first year or two of college in order to be able to have everything done in time. So that's like the general picture of the traditional applicant. And I will say nowadays it's becoming more and more common to take gap years. And so I think, so overall, like the mode of years out from college of first year medical students is 2 years. So that's still seen as like very normal, even though that is sometime after college.
Good. Now we'll get into some non-traditional applicants.
So we think of non-traditional applicants as people who are applying more than 2 years out from the undergraduate degree. So it's really the difference I think we're trying to get at between just taking a gap year, which a lot of people do, where they apply to medical school right after they graduate from college, work for a year somewhere locally or maybe somewhere abroad, and then go into medical school. A non-traditional applicant is really somebody who takes even more time than that. They're typically above the age of 25, and often they have experience in non-medical fields. And we'll touch on that a little bit later, but that can be a range from public health work and international work to teaching, to business. So a lot of different options and backgrounds of different applicants.
Perfect. So with these things considered, you might be wondering who exactly counts as a non-traditional applicant. These are vague, and obviously what we'll talk about doesn't encompass every single possibility of a non-traditional applicant, but we will give you a little overview.
Yeah, so people who would be considered non-traditional applicants, again, this is a non-exhaustive list, but people of non-medical science backgrounds, professional experience in other fields, mature students, and veterans. But just, yeah, to paint a broad picture.
Perfect. Thank you so much. On to the next section. So it's also important now to know if you are a non-traditional student, how will medical schools see your application? So let's get right into that.
So I think this is a really interesting trend that's happening nationally, and it's been going on in the last few years. I'd say probably about a decade or more. But medical schools are really taking a different approach in how they're choosing applicants for their programs. Before, it really depended on either who you knew or what your test scores were and how strong you were as a traditional academic applicant. What was your GPA? What was your MCAT? And nowadays, a lot of schools are a lot more holistic when they're looking at applicants, and they're really looking at applications from people who have life experiences, who have professional experiences, who know how to work with people and talk with people, who've worked with diverse populations, and who are going to really excel as a doctor, because we're kind of learning that great doctors are more than just good test scores. And so this is an opportunity for a lot of non-traditional applicants to really shine.
Thanks so much, Jen. Do you have anything to add to that, Callie?
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, granted, like you still having, the traditional like scores definitely helps and it's still important, but it's not like how a saying I like to have is that it used to be your application was in an envelope, and on the outside of the envelope you had your GPA and MCAT, and what those numbers were determined if they opened the hypothetical envelope to read the rest of your application. And nowadays it's moving more to where they read the full application, oftentimes of everyone who applies to the medical school, although different schools have different ways to do this. And then the GPA and MCAT are important, but just like one piece of that puzzle, a big piece, but not gatekeeping in the same kind of way as it used to.
Thanks so much. So now that we know this about the admissions approach and these changes in recent years, how exactly do medical schools see non-traditional applicants?
Yeah, so non-traditional applicants bring several different things to a student body. One of that is diversity, and that will then add diversity in like the future generation of physicians. And with the diverse perspectives comes people who can enrich medical practice. They might have experience in business or in public health or art, music, whatever, what have you, and can incorporate those fields into medicine. So that's in terms of like looking forward into the future doctors, part of why they want some non-traditional applicants, but also it shows that you are determined and have grit. But what schools don't necessarily want is someone who is going through the motions of applying to med school because they think they're supposed to. And that would, not say like if you're go straight through, that doesn't mean that's necessarily the case. But if you have a whole nother career and then decide to drop that in pursuit of medicine, that shows that you really want to do this. You're not accidentally stumbling into this because your parents told you to or something like that. It really shows that initiative on your part and honestly taking a big risk and showing your dedication to the field.
Amazing. And Jen, do you have anything to add to this in terms of how med schools see non-traditional applicants?
Yeah, I think what Callie covered was great. I think that determination and grit part, like she mentioned, is just so important because medical schools invest a lot of time and a lot of money in the people that they end up choosing. And every year people drop out of med school because it's not the right fit. And a lot of times it's because some people just start on this path and kind of get funneled down this path, whether it's pressure from family or they don't really know what else they can do besides be a doctor. And it's kind of a big risk that med schools are taking on you. And so for you to leave behind a different life or career and jump into this with both feet really impresses a lot of committees.
Absolutely. Thank you. So with these things that medical schools see in non-traditional applicants, diversity, experience, perspective, determination, and grit, there are potentially a few concerns that come with applying as a non-traditional applicant that medical schools might see. So we'll go over those in this next slide.
Yeah, of course, not everything is perfect. And just because you're a non-traditional student doesn't mean you are a perfect fit. What committees are going to look for in you as an applicant is they want to make sure that you are going to be able to adjust back to being a student. That is one thing they don't have to worry about from a traditional applicant. They just were students. They're used to being students. For people who've been out 4, 5, 6 years working in a career, it's sometimes hard to jump back to that full-time student life. And medical school is really hard and you are studying a lot. And so that might be a really big obstacle. Also, students who are a lot older might have trouble making friendships or any other meaningful relationships with their classmates. Typically, if the traditional applicant is out of college, they're going to be 22, 23. And if you're coming in at 31, you might not have a lot in common with your classmates, and that might not make you as happy and as successful. And also, older non-traditional applicants tend to have other lives. They tend to have families. And when you have those external pressures, sometimes that can be challenging to either finish med school or to go to different programs. And so committees are just trying to be conscious of that as well.
Thank you so much. And Callie, do you have anything to add? By the way, if any of you guys want to chime in on something, feel free to do so.
I'll just add, this is slightly tangential, but I will say that in the going off of potentially having more family obligations as a medical student, more for like your own personal side of things, this is cliche, but so true. There's never a good time to, start a family or like lay down roots in that kind of way. And so it's in some ways probably there pros and cons, but it's not like, oh, it'd be so hard in medical school and then in residency it'd be so easy to start having kids. Not at all. So definitely my advice is like, don't plan your like starting a family around like trying to squish it into the perfect timeline, because it's going to be hard regardless. But there are pros and cons to different stages of your training of starting a family, but that's besides the point.
Thank you so much. No, I completely understand that too. There is never the perfect time, just time. All right, so now that we've gone over that, we're going to talk about things that you might want to consider as a non-traditional applicant. These are things that generally will make the transition easier as you go about your med school application. So let's dive in.
Yeah, so as a non-traditional applicant, there's just going to be a bit of a different path with different, like we said, advantages to that, but also different challenges compared to traditional applicants. So it's important for everyone to understand your motives for applying to medical school, but especially for non-traditional applicants to be realistic about the setbacks. If you have a really secure career that you've spent years building up and you're walking away from that to apply to medical school, we're obviously here to help you and we want you to get into medical school, but there's no guarantee that this is going to necessarily work out exactly how you want to. So be realistic about what are you giving up from this and what are you risking. And then to like curate your medical school experience to meet your needs and help and ease that transition. So whether that be like, if you have a family trying to, get into med school someplace that you would have like other family supports to help you with that or things like that, or places that you already have connections.
Do you have anything to add, Jen?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think another challenge non-traditional students face is a lack of support. And that can either be from the people in their lives and in careers, but then also institutional support. Students coming out of college tend to have pre-health committees. They tend to have other students who are also applying, and there's a lot of different communications and tools and academic and personal support that they can get that as a non-traditional applicant you might be doing it on your own, which can be pretty difficult.
Thank you so much. All right. So we can now look at exactly what things you can consider.
So as always, whether you're a traditional or a non-traditional applicant, be really intentional about the schools that you're applying to and really carefully research those programs. I think as a non-traditional applicant, it's a little bit more important because you might have a family, and so location is going to really factor in. What's the cost of living? Can you support your family? Is there good schools around for your children? Do you have grandparents around that can kind of help you, babysit and raise your kids while you're studying full time? You can look at past class demographics of past graduating classes and see if they also had other non-traditional applicants. If every year most of their 95% of their students are all coming straight from college, it might not be a program that either is going to be a good fit for you or likely for you to get in. I think you can also reach out either beforehand or during your interviews about what kind of resources there are, what kind of opportunities there are that are especially relevant to you, maybe the past career that you had. And then also always kind of looking into what's your plan for residency. How can this med school set you best up for success for you going into residency?
Let's see, I think you're muted, Bianca.
Thank you so much. I was very muted. I was just wondering if you had anything to add here, if there are any other considerations students should make as non-traditional applicants.
Yeah, I think that mostly sums it up, just like especially looking at like logistical things like childcare, whether that, be people in your life or like if they have like, maybe they have hospital employees childcare that also is available to medical students, things like that.
Absolutely. All right. So now we'll move on to talking about how you can tailor your application to increase your chances of acceptance or to at least maximize your qualities as a non-traditional applicant. All right, let's get started.
Yeah, so you'll likely have to, so as a non-traditional student, there will be certain prereqs that you have to complete in order to apply to medical school. And let's say you were a graphic design major in college, you probably didn't take that much biology and chemistry. So there's post-bac programs that you can enroll to meet these requirements. And there are specific, post-bac programs that have everything wrapped up together, all of the courses you need to take, made for people who have no science background at all, that come with like, admissions counselors and like specifically tailored for people in this exact situation. But you don't necessarily have to do it like that. Some of them, if you've already taken some of the courses, you don't even qualify to be part of that post-bac program. So you can also kind of DIY it and take independent college classes, what ones are required, fill in which ones you don't have, and do that on your own. And so that just kind of depends kind of on what's where you're coming from and which avenue might work best for you. But regardless, let's say hypothetically you were a biology major in undergrad and then did something completely different. You have all the courses taken. Now it's time to take the MCAT and you're probably a little bit rusty on these concepts if it's been several years since college. So maybe a refresher course, or like, being able to like take some time off work to really, or, or study, to dedicate to studying, or study really far in advance if you're balancing with work, to make sure that you're really set up for success with the MCAT.
Unmute again. Jen, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think Kelly covered it. I don't have anything to add right now.
All right, perfect. So after your prerequisite courses, it's important to also look at your GPA and MCAT score as a non-traditional applicant. So let's dig into that.
So GPA and MCAT obviously are still important. Even though schools are taking holistic approaches, they are always going to be an important part. And especially if you are kind of coming from a non-science or non-academic background during your gap years or time off, and you are further out from your undergraduate studies, having that strong MCAT score can be just one of those ways that you reassure admissions committees that you are a capable and successful student that they can take a chance on. That being said, make sure you're researching your schools and finding out what their baseline, average, and minimum GPA and MCAT scores are, especially after you've taken the test and you know what your college GPA is. Sometimes if you've had really amazing life experiences and successful career outside of college, that can kind of help you not cover up, but boost a poor college GPA, which is nice, which is part of the kind of holistic approach. Something else I'll say is that a lot of students might take the MCAT during college and then take a few years off. And so just be conscious that your MCAT score is only valid for a certain number of years. And so you need to make sure you're researching the schools, and most schools tend to accept scores within 4 to 5 years, but some only accept scores that are 2 or 3 years old. So make sure you're researching into that, and you might have to retake your MCAT, which can be difficult if you've been out of school for 3 or 4 years. So you might also think about getting some kind of MCAT tutoring or signing up for a third-party study website.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, like let's say you had, a less than perfect GPA in undergrad. Another way that, maybe would be it might be helpful to boost that is if you've taken postgraduate coursework. So whether or not that's a post-bac program or like a master's program and whatever, showing like a strong upward trajectory can be really beneficial. They still see your undergrad grades regardless, but that can be one way to help boost your application.
Amazing. All right. So we will now move on to some extracurriculars, activities, and experiences as you apply for the MCAT.
So extracurriculars, they might be different than people who are applying right out of college. It might, not be as much I was the president of this student org, and it might be more I had this job as a clinical research coordinator or as something completely unrelated to medicine. I think that's something that people can get worried. Like, let's say I worked in finance or whatnot for a few years out of college, definitely include that in your application. At first, that way they know what you've been up to and for the past few years, but also it shows like a really unique perspective and expertise that you bring. So regardless of what you've been, so a lot of your extracurricular activities might not be, I was involved in this club. They might be more like I had these jobs, and that is perfectly okay. Make sure to highlight them in your application. And make sure to tie it into, let's say, you worked as, again, in finance or something, tie that into like what skills you got out of that might be relevant to becoming a physician. That might take a little bit of thinking, but there was something in your life that, caused you to make that transition. And so, thinking really deeply about that and putting that in your application.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Just some technical difficulties. There you go. Do you have anything to add in terms of activities, experience, extracurriculars for non-traditional students here, Jen?
Not too much more than what Callie already covered. I just think that, those experiences that maybe aren't directly related to medicine and science that you might not feel like including are going to be what help you stand out the most from the crowd and are really going to give you those skills that are going to make you successful as a physician. So definitely include them, be proud of them, be proud of the path that you took to get here, and just know that all of those rich life experiences are really going to set you up for success later.
Thank you so much. We will move on now to the next one, which are letters of recommendation. This will definitely look very different for a non-traditional applicant than for traditional applicants. So let's get started on that.
So for letters of recommendation, you'll likely have letters, and you should have letters from either your job or your internship or your employer, whatever experience that you've been doing since you've graduated, you should have some kind of letter of evaluation showing that you were good at whatever you were doing. That being said, a lot of programs are still going to require those basic letters that they require of all applicants. And so that's going to be 2 science, sometimes 1 non-science professor, someone who taught you in a course. And what's nice is that often can be your post-bac if you need to take a post-bac course. So those might be more recent professors. Sometimes if you haven't gathered those letters, before you started your experience, they can be from professors who maybe haven't taught you in 3 or 4 years, which can be kind of challenging to reach out after all of this time and ask for a letter. I think starting early and being upfront, trying to rekindle those connections. And it's sometimes hard to look ahead, but if you know that you're going to be taking some time off to pursue something else, trying to get those letters and asking those professors to store them on their desktop for you until you're ready to apply, or they can always send them to you for you to store and you can send it back to them. There's kind of different ways that you can be strategic with that. And that's all stuff that we can try to help you with. But your letters of recommendation are going to look different, but in a lot of ways, you're still going to have to check off those exact same boxes that everybody does.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, if you are in the situation where you took all your courses a while ago, you haven't kept in contact with your professors, and now you're reaching back out, I recommend this for everyone who's asking for letters of recommendation, but it's even more important if you haven't seen them in a while to set up a meeting to talk with them. I mean, face-to-face or Zoom face-to-face, to really tell your story, remind them who you are, explain your path towards medicine, and help, curate, remind them of what attributes you want them to highlight about you. I think that's absolutely essential when asking someone for a letter in general, but especially if they haven't seen you in a few years.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Now, finally, we will move on to talking about your personal statement, which seems to be a very huge, important part of an application, especially as someone who's applying as a non-traditional applicant. I think that maybe this could be a great way to really tell your story. So let's talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, so your personal statement should be personal. It should be paint an overall picture of who you are, what you've done, what you value, what your goals are. That's true for everyone, but if you have more years of things that you've done and time to reflect on what your goals are, you have some rich experiences to draw from in your personal statement. That being said, you want to make it clear in your personal statement how you had decided to go to medical school, what changed your mind. That can be, from a lot of different things. You want to make sure you have some if you can, some anecdotes or an anecdote of a patient experience. But maybe you have some anecdotes about working with someone in a research setting or in another career, and that somehow is what prompted you to decide to change careers. Include those anecdotes. They will really make your personal statement stand out, and be honest about how you came to this decision. I think that also, if there are any weaknesses in your application, your personal statement in general is a really good time to address that. But you really want to show them that you are someone who will do well in medical school. You'll adapt to being back in the academic environment, and that you might have changed your mind about your career path once, but now you are very firmly decided on medicine and you're not going to change your mind again. And as it always goes, show, don't tell. Like, don't write out the words, I am going to adapt well, right? Like, show your ability to adapt, show your how committed you are to making this decision through, especially in a narrative format, highlighting experiences that you've had.
Anything to add to this, Jen?
Yeah, I think just really finding the personal statement as your opportunity to explain why you made the choices that you did, and address your motivations, and then also address any mistakes. Be honest. If you say you found yourself in law and realize it didn't bring you joy, and what brought you joy was, I don't know, working with patients or something, be honest about that. That would be such a compelling story. You don't have to try to shy away from being different, because medical school committees are going to know that you're a non-traditional applicant.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to go a bit more into the personal statement.
So we've kind of briefly touched on these, but the really important aspects of the personal statement that you really have to address, because everyone's going to be wondering why. And, the first, you should address the timing. So what took you so long to get to this path? Why are you applying now? Is it because you couldn't make up your mind earlier and you have trouble committing to different things and you might have trouble sticking through with this, or did you have some kind of significant challenge that might pose an obstacle as well during your medical school program? You need to answer that question, because everybody's going to be wondering that in the back of their head. Also showing your passion and your dedication. So why are you coming back to medicine, and what have you learned that's going to bring you success in med school and further on as a doctor? And then, what did you gain specifically from those past experiences? So really going into those concrete skills and listing them out, not thinking that it's obvious that, oh, if I say that I'm a teacher, they must know that I'm good at communicating, working with different students. Make sure you're really laying that out and explaining to people, and not making assumptions about what they are understanding from your past experiences.
Yeah, very well said, and that's applicable for the activities and experiences section as well.
All right. Thank you guys so much for that. So now we will move on to our final section. Some tips on how you can make the most of your application as a non-traditional candidate.
So just, a few tips kind of summarizing things that we've talked about so far. Clarify your goals. This is a time to really reflect, journal, think to yourself, why are you making that transition? Have that answer be crystal clear in your mind. In part because you're going to need to write about this, and you're going to be asked about this in interviews, but also to be true to yourself and know that this is really something that you're committed to do, because again, you're taking a big, this is a huge life-altering thing that you're doing, and to make sure that you're very confident in this decision before embarking on this path. Choose your schools wisely. Make sure that they're friendly to non-traditional applicants, and that if there are places that you might have outside support at. Highlight your strengths. You have unique strengths. You are someone who's going to stand out. You have a unique story. Make sure to tell your story in that way. In doing that, draw from your life experiences. Dismantle admissions concerns. Like, make sure to show that you are decided on medicine now. You are going to be able to be capable of medicine. It's if there's any other red flags in your application, make sure those are addressed. And when writing, show, don't tell. Drawing from, if you have anecdotes of stories with clients or patients, include that in your writing. And don't be afraid to ask for guidance. You might not have a pre-health counselor whose job is at your university is to support you, but that's part of why we're here, is to help you with that. And also, if you have maybe you have friends who are already in medical school, or already finished medical school. They might have some insights too.
I would say it's also worth it if you're not super far out. A lot of times your undergraduate university and their pre-health committee or pre-health advisor still works with alum and people who have recently graduated. When you start getting many years out, that becomes a less of a useful resource, and some schools don't offer that at all. But as you're looking for guidance and support and ideas, it's always worth reaching out and giving it a try.
Amazing. All right, so now that we've covered our tips and everything that you need to know as a non-traditional applicant about your application, we're going to move on to the Q&A section of the webinar. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box, and we will wait for a little bit. And in the meantime, I was wondering, Jen and Callie, if you guys have any words of advice, any stories you want to share. I know, Jen, you were a non-traditional applicant, and maybe, I don't know, the floor is yours. Anything that might be valuable to everyone watching right now.
Let's see, I guess I'll come from the perspective of someone who was a traditional applicant. I started med school directly out of undergrad, didn't take any gap years. And I will say that was hard in its own way. And like on the interview trail, people were like, how are you interviewing while still in school? I'm like, I rescheduled a final to be here. And when I started med school, I was one of the very youngest people in the class. Maybe about 20-25% of us had gone straight through. So I'm saying this to say it is becoming increasingly more normal to take time off, and there are advantages that come with that as well. So don't view it only as a detriment by any means. Like, it is becoming more normal, and because it gives you more unique experiences and diverse perspectives and assets that you bring to medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's pros and cons to both sides. I took some time off. I took 3 years. I did the Peace Corps for 2 years, and then I worked in clinical research for a year. And when I was finally applying to med school, I had to retake the MCAT, which was a huge pain because I had forgotten all of that stuff from college. So I had to sign up for like a third-party MCAT course and study and kind of get back into student mode and reach out to old professors and see if they remembered me. And it was a lot of work. But I also just had so many amazing stories and experiences that during my interviews I got to share about, and I got to write, so many fun secondaries, about different challenges and different patients that I'd gotten to work with. So that was also a bonus. So I don't think there's any one right way. I don't think we could tell anybody that you're going to be more successful if you go straight through or if you take time off. I think everybody's journey is different, and you should just prepare for it and then go for it.
That's great. All right, so it seems like we don't have any questions to answer today, so we will end it here. Thank you, Callie and Jen, so much for your insight and advice. We appreciate you. Thank you, everyone who's here with us this evening. Have a great rest of your night, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.